Does trauma last forever? The answer is yes. So, join me over on the next episode of Inner Work Essentials, where we're going to look at internal family systems and ideal trauma therapy for the never-ending traumatic misery which we are doomed to suffer from. All jokes aside, trauma does indeed last forever, but not in the sense of the symptomatic consequences, the everyday wounding, and the emotional disturbances which arise from the trauma. This area can very much be managed. It can be healed. It can be released. That's why we do inner work. But trauma, capital T trauma and little t trauma, always leaves scars. If you have a scar on your arm, no matter how wonderfully healed it is, you will always have some broken tissue, some damaged tissue, and that's always going to be present. So where does that leave us in terms of the timeline of healing? Well, the major point that I'd like to float in your direction, as I'm sure you're aware, is that we are never fully healed. We can't get to that point. That's a mythical landmark that we head towards. The process of healing or making whole is a journey. It's more of a verb than an end state. But there is still a timeline for realistic healing. I want to begin by showing you the suggestion of Arthur Janov, who wrote today's Inner Work Essential, The New Primal Scream. This book first came out in 1970, and Arthur Janov is an incredible therapist. He looks at things like embryology, birth pain, somatic healing, cathartic healing, deep repression, and how to heal that in a holistic manner. He's one of the therapists who live in my library, whose essence I really resonate with. And I'll show you what I mean with a quote directly from the book, which relates to this topic of how long does it take to heal. He wrote this 20 years after the first book came out, so this is 20 more years of practice. This is the perspective of someone who's dedicated their life to watching hundreds of people healing from diseases and mental disorders like suicidal ideation, sexual abuse, childhood abuse, dissociation, schizophrenia, paranoia, narcissism, codependence. He's seen it all, and he's worked with people across the whole territory. And this is what he says about the timeline of healing from the book. Patients make great changes after the first year, but major changes go on for 5 to 8 years. I think that after 5 years, most of the work is done. It seems like a long time, but remember, this is crucial, but remember, we are undoing a lifetime of damage, and a 30-year-old still has most of his life ahead of him. Earlier in the book, he says some wonderful things which really resonate with me as a therapeutic support in the work that I do with clients about not cutting off a session too short, not having a 50-minute endpoint and leaving a patient crying. It goes on for as long as it needs to go on. This isn't to say that my sessions go on for 6 hours straight, but there always needs to be that variance around a threshold, and the same idea applies of how long it takes to heal. My best suggestion in regards to the timeline of healing is what I'm trying to do with this series, Inner Work Essentials. There are 52 episodes planned for this series. It's going to take me 6 months to film all of them, doing 2 per week. And theoretically speaking, if someone has the kind of intensity and suffering and single-focused commitment to healing which I had when I was 21, they will be able to read 52 books and apply the principles of those 52 books, at least at the starting level, within a single year. It's 1 book per week. But how many of us can devote full 24/7 attention to the wounding which we have suffered? Very few of us. In my own personal healing journey, when I was 21, I graduated from university at the very top of my class at a top 1% university, and all of the external accolades meant fuck all when it came to my internal well-being. I was deeply depressed, often feeling suicidal, and I devoted 3 years, 3 full years as my single-minded pledge to heal my mental health. And that was it. I ended up going volunteer traveling and working my way around Europe on 20 different volunteer projects, doing things like off-grid farming and eco-construction and livestock care and general maintenance, all very earthy, practical jobs. But crucially, I did that because it was only 5 hours a day of work on average, and I got to be very mobile, and crucially, a lot of time for introspection and practices like fasting and journaling and meditation and all of the self-initiation, spiritual emergency, smorgasbord opportunities that we go through. After 3 years, I think actually after about 2 years, I got to the point where I would say around 80% of that suicidal darkness was released. I no longer wanted to actively end my life. But here I am, almost 5 years later from that initial commitment. Am I healed? No, I wouldn't say I am. I'd say that I'm probably 90% of the way towards healing, but like the mountain which gets steeper at the end, those final kilometers or miles of journey, they're going to take years. They are a practice. But this isn't really a worry. It's not a worry for you or me talking about this topic if we're looking at the timeline for inner work, because the major gains are to be made in that first 80%. Imagine if you felt 80% better. Imagine if you were 80% less anxious, paranoid, addicted, whatever it may be. For me, it meant sobriety. It meant significant lifestyle change. It meant reading obsessively and learning everything I possibly could about the inner working space, which is now what I'm trying to present to you. But in the case of clients that I work with, this 1 year timeline seems to work really well. My minimum commitment of working with someone is 1 month, and a lot can be done in that first month. You can almost get like 20% of the way in, and then it dips down, and then it's a consistent process, and then someone peaks up again. But that 1 month of really focused, incubated work can bring so much lightness. But healing, as a broad concept, as a way of updating our nervous system, a way of changing our identity formation and realigning relationships externally and jobs and living situations and relationships to substances. Arthur Janov said it right. 1.5 years, you're going to make significant progress, but the changes will come 5 to 8 years after you begin. I'm personally at the 5-year mark of being dedicated to healing and self-care on a daily basis. In 3 years' time, I probably won't feel too different than how I feel now because my lifestyle has been set up at the foundational level. I have default positive self-regard. Doesn't mean I don't experience bad emotions, but not even labeling bad emotions, but you get what I'm saying in terms of common language. That new foundation is there, but to build back up will take many, many, many more years. So it's not a question of when do you start in terms of starting at 15, 25, 35, or 50. It's how many years of consistent attention are you giving to healing activities, and how much of your life do you orient around that new way of being in the world, which is the opposite, or healed complementary opposite, of that traumatic pattern from the past, right? How many hours per day? How many weeks in a row? How many months in sequence? And how many years consistently are we moving towards that healed vision of what we could be? That's what defines the timeline. It is entirely subjective. If you want to know how to heal each individual stage, that's what I'm doing in this series in Work Essentials. In fact, Arthur Janov, although I'm not talking about really anything that he's therapeutically offering, just his mindset as a therapist, his perspective on deep somatic healing is well worth your attention. He is a top therapist in my books. He's very good. Please read him. But the timeline cannot be dictated. It just can't be. So yes, trauma does last forever. We're always going to have the scar tissue. You can do incredible work in a 1-month container. People go on silent retreats for 10 days and get spontaneous unlocks, spontaneous release of all of that heaviness or some kind of divine inspiration. a month of focused work with a therapist or some kind of body worker or some kind of spiritual support, depending on what stage you're at, that can be life-changing. People can completely shift their trajectory. But a year of healthy relationships externally to other people and to yourself, substance restriction, healthy diet and exercise every single day, plus all of the research and application of what you're reading on a consistent basis, that dictates the timeline. I'm personally of the belief that I will probably be on this path for my whole life. I am currently not choosing to participate in drink and drugs and certain types of relationships which kind of function like toxic substances, being around certain types of energy, certain types of people, certain types of environments. I always hold that at a distance so I can live how I want to live. And that's the healing commitment. Again, the scar tissue will remain, but the way that we prevent further scars from entering into our life, and also this next level perspective that when you unblock or you allow the polluted trauma to leave your system, it creates a level or a thinning of that fog which is in front of you so that you can see even deeper to what you didn't recognize. This is shadow work. This is unconscious work. It's almost like every year of healing that we progress through, we can sometimes feel that more's coming up every time. Like, here's this next thing with my father, here's this next thing with my inner critic. Oh God, there's the masculine archetypes, and I haven't even thought about my feminine archetypes. It keeps unraveling and spiraling, but it's always worth our time to pause and reflect just where we were a few years ago and how much has been liberated so far. And if you're at the stage where that work's more ahead of you, know that the consistency is key. I'm doing my best to provide 52 episodes, 52 opportunities for your own research and your own direction in this series. And if you took only 20 of those books and read them in this year, you would be, I can't make the promise, obviously. If you realistically read 20 books from this series in 1 year, and you've thought about this and practiced every week, 52 weeks straight, 50% might be a realistic goal. Continue that for a few more years, find other teachers, go to bibliographies and look for the next resources that you're going to apply. I think we'll get there. I don't know the timeline. Trauma does indeed last forever, but the symptoms and the everyday consequences of that emotional disturbance need not dictate our everyday reality. But if you want a direct place to go to really unravel some of that trauma therapy in a very practical way, then it's time to turn over to internal family systems, parts work, and one of the most nuanced and wonderful views of archetypal parts-based therapy that I know of. You're not going to want to miss it, and I'll see you over there.